Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really powerful story about power, truth, and the kind of prisons we end up building for ourselves.
Okay, so let's just jump right in with this central question, the one that sits at the very heart of this story. What happens when a weak person gets a ton of power? It's a question that, you'll see, has some pretty intense answers.
All right, so our story kicks off not in some epic battle, but inside a palace, a real gilded cage. And at the center of it is this ruler, the Tetrarch. He's got all the stuff, right? The fancy title, the courtiers lounging around, but it's all just a fragile facade. Now, here's what's so interesting about the Tetrarch's power. It's not what you think. It's not about real strength. The source material tells us it's a will to power that's actually born from weakness, just a pathetic submission to his own worst impulses. And what was that impulse? Well, he was completely consumed by hunger for his brother's wife, a woman named Herodias, and he just took her. An act that completely violated the ancient laws of his people. And you've got to see, this wasn't some bold power play. It was a surrender, a total surrender to his own weakness. Okay, so you have that picture of the decadent palace in your head. Now I want you to contrast that with the stark, clean wilderness. Because out there, a totally different and, frankly, a much more potent kind of power was brewing. And this is where you really see the two worlds clash. On one side, you've got the Tetrarch, a guy who has literally everything but is a total slave to his desires. And on the other, the Forerunner, a man with nothing who is the absolute master of himself. One guy's power comes from a fancy chair, the other's comes from his own character, from virtue itself. So you just know these two are on a collision course, right? What happens when the phony power of the throne slams head-on into the unbending power of the truth? Well, out there in the wilderness, where you really can't hide from the truth, the Forerunner hears about what the Tetrarch did. And he doesn't just, whisper his disapproval. No, his voice thunders out of the desert. And these words, wow, they weren't just some casual criticism. The text describes them as a force of nature, like a hammer just smashing into the Tetrarch's paper-thin pride. It was an unyielding judgment that absolutely rocked the palace to its core. So when that hammer of truth falls, it creates two totally different reactions inside the palace. And these reactions, well, they tell you everything you need to know about the people in charge. The king himself, he's a mess. He's perplexed, haunted by the words, but he's also kind of morbidly fascinated. But Herodias, oh no, she is furious. She is filled with this festering, all-consuming resentment because someone dared to expose her new position for what it was, a pathetic grasp for power. So, since they can't defeat the argument because, truth is truth, what do? This ruler with no backbone and this woman with no conscience? They stop attacking the message and start attacking the messenger. And this is so important to get. Their whole plot to silence the Forerunner wasn't a show of strength, it was an admission of defeat. It was basically them confessing just how weak they truly were. And this is the classic playbook for this kind of resentful power, isn't it? Step 1, you get hit with a truth you just can't deny. Step 2, you realize you have no good argument against it. So what's the last resort? You attack the person who said it. You throw the man in a cage, desperately hoping you can cage the idea along with him. But here's the ultimate irony. Arresting the Forerunner, this big show of force, it had this profound unintended consequence for the king. This act of control was actually the thing that made him lose it completely. Yeah, putting the prophet in jail wasn't a victory at all. It was like the king put up a giant mirror right in front of his own face. The bars on that physical cell might as well have been the bars of the king's own psychological cage. And what did he see looking back at him in that mirror? Not some great, glorious ruler, nope. Just a scared, pathetic man who was way more afraid of a woman's will than he was of the truth itself. So as we wrap this up, the whole story leaves us with this one final lingering question, doesn't it? Who was truly in prison? The man in the physical cell who was master of himself and beholden only to the truth? Or the man on the throne, trapped in his own gilded cage, a prisoner to his lust, his weakness, and his fear?